Inside New Orleans Sports with Eric Asher is underwritten by the Union Capital Corporation and Natel's Air Conditioning and Heating, a proud sponsor of the St. Jude Dream Home.
Good evening, New Orleans, and welcome to Inside New Orleans Sports. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Over the next hour, we'll talk a lot of New Orleans Saints. We hope to get to the New Orleans Pelicans, and if we got a shot, we'll maybe talk a little bit about college basketball, but so much happening with the New Orleans Saints, and we got a great panel for you tonight. Kristian Garic of WWL Radio and the Saints Sideline Reporter, along with Chad Sabadie of Fox 8 Sports, both join us tonight. And guys, thanks so much for being with us. Certainly appreciate it. You've been with us before, Chad. This is your maiden voyage, Kristian.
Yeah.
Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited. Thanks.
Well,
Appreciate
I'm excited to have you. But we always like to start off to get a little taste of what you guys are involved in. And Kristian, do you take a breath? Because you got a lot of things going on.
I don't get a lot of sleep, honestly.
Right.
But, you know, I like it. I mean, look, I've got one of the best gigs in the city. I feel like, at least, as a Saints sideline reporter for WWL and Saints Radio. And, of course, we just launched not too long ago, T-Bob Hebert, and myself on 3WL 1350 AM, launched a show called Double Coverage in the morning, 6 to 9 a.m. And we're really excited about that. And, of course, chasing free agency and all the Saints news. Look, you know, on Twitter, you can follow me there at Kristian Garic 1 and all over Facebook as well. Look, I'm having a time of my life, honestly. I love what I do.
No, that sounds good. And of course, we all get it. Cover sports for a living.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah,
No
right.
doubt.
We'll take it.
Chad, you guys are knocking it out the park over at Fox 8, doing a great job. Wall-to-wall Saints when you want Saints
right.
coverage. Tell us a little bit about some of the shows you're involved in.
Over at Fox 8, we've got a very good staff and a lot of variety. You know, we like to get to it all. Of course, very Saints heavy, Saints dominated. Of course, we're owned by Tom Benson. You know, Mr. Benson, of course, treats us pretty well, but it's fun. You know, we go from the regular season through the postseason. It never really ends, and Kristian will tell you, the first one to say, this is a new season for the Saints. 2014 really begins now, but every day with the Pelicans as well, and our own Jennifer Hale travels courtside with the Pelicans, so she keeps us busy with reports from the road as well, and it's a lot of fun. We'll dabble in the prep sports from time to time. The high school hardwood basketball championships are going on as we speak, and this weekend, and a little bit of LSU, the Tigers. You know, we stopped by spring ball recently, so we have enough people to get everywhere, which is a great with the size of our sports team, and we try to bring the quantity and the quality for all the New Orleans viewers.
Largest sports team in the city, if I'm not mistaken, am I right?
In the state, has to be.
In the state?
I mean, we've got
Wow.
7 going on 8 people in our sports department, and we enjoy every day working with a great crew for sure.
Amazing. Guys, first of all, a lot of great news. It really happened early with the salary cap. Everybody thought about $126 million up from $123, ends up being $133 million. That's great news for the Saints. But I got to say it. I said it on my radio show. I'm going to say it again right now. Mickey Loomis is a cap magician.
Without question.
He is amazing. And, you know, all you got to do is look at the history of Mickey Loomis and how he's been able to maneuver the cap, even now with a championship contending team where most teams tend to drop off when they get their free agents, start to hit the market. This team has continued to reload, and really got to give kudos, first of all, to Mickey Loomis. And, you know, thought it was going to be kind of a quiet free agency period for the Saints. And, you know, I actually heard and read that Jairus Byrd was coming into town, and I chuckled. And I said it on my radio show this morning that basically I thought he was coming in for a great meal. I thought he was heading out to one of our great restaurants. He'd eat, get wine to dine, then he's on the first plane out to where he's really going to sign. Jairus Byrd signs with the Saints. 6 years, $54 million. $28 million guaranteed, $11 million on his signing bonus. But again, a cap hit of about $4 million is what it was reported today. I'll go with you first, Kristian. This is an incredible signing for this team. 3-time All-Pro, a guy that's dominated, and a guy that you really needed. For the first time since Darren Sharper, you got a playmaker on the back end.
You got a ball hawk. You got a guy that can go out there and change the game. And ultimately, if you look at this Saints defense last year, what did they lack? turnovers. And they started out the gate turning the ball over a lot. You saw him score a lot of points because of that. You give Drew Brees a couple of extra possessions a game, he's going to make you pay for the most part. But down the stretch, I think you saw that's why they went 6-6 down the stretch in the final 12 games, because they couldn't turn the football over. Well, this guy is going to change that. Look, he had 22 career interceptions. In the last 3 years, he had 12. Malcolm Jenkins and Roman Harper had 6.
Right. Yes.
Okay? He's 3-time All-Pro, as you mentioned. Listen, this is a player that isn't just a difference maker. He's a game changer. A lot like Drew Brees on offense, he can make everybody better on defense, just like Drew does on offense. This is a significant signing for this football team.
A lot of people are saying the most significant defensive signing in franchise history. And it's amazing to think of the overall overhaul of this defense from where they were just a year and a half ago under Steve Spagnuolo, dead last in the NFL. And once Sean Payton was reinstated January of 2013, he said, we've got to change this. All right, Steve, sorry, you're out of here. Rob Ryan's available. He comes on down here. They get the right personnel in. Had a fantastic season. You were there every step of the way on the sidelines, and it must have been a lot of fun to see up close and personal these guys putting it all out on the line because they love playing for Rob Ryan.
Sure.
And now they're attracting high, coveted free agents, these prize free agents to come on down here and play. And Jairus Byrd is just the next piece, perhaps the missing link to take this defense from very good, top 5 ranked in the NFL, to a championship defense in 2014.
Kenny Vaccaro and Jairus Byrd. That's a scary safety tandem. Yeah. It's going to remind you a lot of, I mean, you can see the design here. It's a very similar to the path of the Super Bowl champions, Seattle Seahawks. Now, they don't have the Richard Sherman at the cornerback, but let me tell you, Keenan Lewis
he's a shutdown guy.
He's a notch below, but I mean, Richard Sherman's all world. So, but nonetheless, hey, look, I love the signing, and I think that you can clearly see maybe a shift slightly in philosophy for this football team, and then the young nucleus. 26, 27-year-old players, a lot of them on the Saints defense.
You know, I agree with you, Kristian. And look, when you look at where this team is right now, with an aging quarterback who still has championship caliber, you maybe have to change things up a bit. And you got to get maybe a little better on defense where you could rely on outscoring people before. Now you got to maybe play championship defense. You may have to run the ball a little bit more than you have in the past to, again, protect Drew Brees. But, again, they found a lot of guys on the defensive side they didn't know they had, guys that emerged. Because, remember, last year they were talking about Will Smith and Jonathan Vilma and Harper and Jenkins and all these guys being starters. All of a sudden, wham, you get all these young guys coming in because of injuries, and they've excelled. Now you got a guy like Byrd on the back end. He's not just a guy that's a ball hawk, like you said. Look at the number of tackles that he's had. Between him and Vaccaro, both guys are solid tacklers as well.
And you can play Kenny Vaccaro a little bit more down in the box now. That's what he gives you, too, some versatility. But also, Akeem Hicks is a player that I absolutely love for the Saints along that defensive line. I think he was one of the unsung guys last year, didn't get enough publicity, and I think, or enough credit, if you will, but I think that's an ascending player. You talk about Cam Jordan and Junior Gillette on the outside, obviously a defensive end and outside linebacker, and the unknowns, Victor Butler. But, man, you look at this roster, the defensive side of the football, chock full of young talent that you feel like probably their best football is ahead of them.
And the chance to play this complementary style of football, Drew Brees must be loving every minute of it because he's looking at his window of opportunity saying, all right, guys, I know I'm going to believe in myself and have confidence, but I'm 35. Realistically, how many more productive all-pro seasons do I have left? 2, maybe 3, the length of the rest of his contract, his $100 million man contract. But this defense is taking its step to be that championship level squad, and now it's up to them to get the rest of the pieces in place, and we'll talk about Jimmy Graham a little bit later, but they took a huge step in the right direction, and like you said, we thought it was going to be a quiet offseason to start, maybe just the Graham, just hiatus and just craziness to go with, but they made a slam dunk with Jairus Byrd.
Well, they really did. Most publications had him as the #1 free safety on the market. Some publications, like Pro Football Focus, had him as the #1 player in free agency. So that tells you what kind of a coup it is. And you mentioned how young this defense is, young and inexpensive. I mean that's the thing.
In the right places.
Oh yeah. No doubt. I mean, you have to pay him eventually, but by that time, Breeze is probably coming off his contract. You're probably moving into another era, but they're inexpensive right now, much like what you see with Seattle and San Francisco, where they've got a young team. They don't have to. Within 2 years, they're going to find out what it's like to have to pay those guys. But right now, with the exception of Keenan Lewis, who has a cap-friendly deal, you look at Byrd, who now has a cap-friendly deal. For the most part, Lofton is going to get into maybe his deal, the meat of his deal. These guys pretty cap-friendly on the defensive side of the ball.
Without question. I mean, the players you just rattled off, and then of course Akeem Hicks Cam Jordan, you're going to have to pay.
You will.
All right.
Now, is that next year? Does he
you
come
get
on
an
next
extra year on him. You get an extra year on him because actually it was said on this show by Larry Holder. Because of something that was going on in the collective bargaining agreement, anyone that was in the first round of that particular draft, you get one more year on
2011.
Yes,
because they hadn't finalized that whole deal yet, and that was a part of it. Larry absolutely nailed that one. Listen, I mean, you look at Cam Jordan, Junior Gillette, you look in the middle, and I think David Hawthorne, certainly another unsung guy. I thought he had a very productive season last year.
Yes.
The question mark to me, though, is at corner. The opposite of Keenan Lewis.
Yes.
Where are they going there? And is it going to be Patrick Robinson, who's coming off a knee injury? Is it Corey White? I think they address that. Once the free agency market settles a bit, they go find a bargain to come in and compete. And, oh, by the way, they'll draft one as well.
And they can live with a young player at that position now because Vaccaro has a year of experience. You got a guy in Bird who obviously is a center fielder, is going to help you. And you got Keenan Lewis on the other side. So you can bring in that mid-level veteran, but also you can nurture that young player that can come in. And again, because you're surrounding him with some really great players.
I think it's important that you need both the young guy and the veteran, because you look at Corey White, you mentioned he's had some great moments, but for the most part, very inconsistent, underachieving in his tenure with the Black and Gold. Patrick Robinson, coming off of his injury, you're not sure what you're going to get in 2014 as he kind of works his way back, a former first-round draft pick who's also underachieved. So hopefully they can find that mid-level veteran that you guys are mentioning and bring him in, someone with experience who's been through the wars, because experience in the NFL is huge when it comes to these young players. You're not going to get a Kenny Vaccaro in every draft class. He's a special young player. But if you want to use one of the Saints draft picks this season to take a defensive back, a corner, someone that maybe has a knack for making plays as well, that under the tutelage of Jairus Byrd, Keenan Lewis, and Kenny Vaccaro now can really grow over the next year, then that could be something special in this back four.
Well, I definitely agree. And not just that, let's throw in Bush as well,
right?
Who is now
that free safety look.
We look at free safety look. Wow, I mean that's a big change from throwing Harper, Jenkins, and Vaccaro in there, or you say Vaccaro, Bush, and Jenkins or Harper. Now you got Byrd, Bush, and Vaccaro. That's a pretty formidable free safety.
You got the thumper, you got the tackler, and Kenny Vaccaro. That's one thing that I noticed right away about him when he first arrived here in New Orleans. He put your hands on you, you're going down. What's the hallmark of every great defense? They can tackle. They're going to bring you down. That was, I think, a big calling card for the Saints last year on defense. And I mean, Jairus Byrd, we mentioned. Raphael Bush, I think, is an excellent role player. He's not going to necessarily set the world on fire. He's affordable. The way this CBA is structured now, it's about those guys that are from year 1 through 6 and are premium players. Those premium guys are going to get their money. And 1 through 6, the guys that are 7, 8, 9, and 10, they're getting run out of the league.
Yeah. And if you look at the way the Saints cap is set up right now, it's pretty much set up that way. It's top heavy, but again, we'll talk about it a little bit later on, possible maneuverability on restructuring some deals so that, again, the Saints can do a little bit more in free agency, and we'll see what's going to happen with Jimmy Graham. More good news came out, again, Pierre Thomas, $2.9 million against the cap, no dead money. Best screen player on this team, a guy that is probably the best blitz picker-upper on the team as well. With the loss of Darren Sproles, which is impending, he's probably looking to be traded. You didn't want to lose a guy like Pierre Thomas, and he was able to work out a 2-year deal, which, again, we don't know the terms of it, but pretty cap-friendly. We'll take you first, Chad. Your thoughts on Pierre Thomas and what he means to this team and how big of a signing this was.
I think it's huge. I mean, Jairus Byrd is the home run, but internally and just locally here, we all love the fact that PT, the cruiser, is coming back to town for another few years. You need depth at every position, but especially at running back throughout the ups and downs, the grind of an NFL campaign. Your running backs are going to take a few nicks along the way. So Mark Ingram, Darren Sproles, they had their issues the last few years. PT as well, he missed the 2 postseason games, but he's been pretty durable. And you just have to love the grit of this young man. Undrafted, free agent, been with the Black and Gold since 2008, I believe, really just puts it on the line. He won that Atlanta Falcon game on that Thursday night this past season for the Saints. You mentioned how well he does in blitz pickups, in the screen game as well. He can do a little bit of everything, the leading rusher for the Saints last season. And now with this new perception of the Saints moving to a more ball-controlled, manage the clock, ground and pound type of game to complement Drew Brees' passing attack, you need a player like him.
Yeah, and Pierre Thomas fits exactly what the Saints are looking for. All right, in the running back position, And the running back position in the NFL, that's the last position I would want to play because they're being mistreated all over the place because of it's been devalued. But nonetheless, Pierre Thomas, I think for what you're paying for him, regardless of what the new details are of this new contract, I think you're getting a bargain. You're getting a guy with great veteran presence. Okay, he came in 2007 as an undrafted rookie free agent. And what he brings to this table, as both of you guys have mentioned, in the running game, in the passing game as well, he had over 70 receptions last year. Okay, so how much can you replace of that production if you totally part ways when you're already thinking about parting ways with Darren Sproles? Look, I mean, I think it was one of those guys where, hey, you sign up for a 2-year deal, which ultimately probably means a 1-year deal, and you revisit it next year.
I would agree with that.
And he's one of the best locker room guys. I mean, he's great with us in the media, but he's a great teammate. They all love him.
Mark Ingram was not going to be not going to be the oldest guy in that running back room. They weren't. I don't think they were going to.
And in the community as well. He's one of the first Saints you see at all, like the high schools or the middle schools, helping out with the kids or reading programs or just giveaways around the holidays. Pierre Thomas is there front and center, and we're glad he's here to stay for at least a little while longer.
Yeah, no doubt. And look, as I mentioned, when you look at all the leaders that they've lost, the core that they have to part ways with, guys that played a lot of games for this team on the defensive side of the ball, losing a guy like Lance Moore, losing guys that have won a lot of games. You really hope that you could hold on to a guy like Pierre Thomas. And really, I know the fans are happy about it, but I think Drew Brees is probably the happiest guy in the building right now because he's going to protect his blind side.
Yeah, but now you got question marks along the offensive line.
Well, you do. Let's before we get into Sproles, let's get into that because Zach Strief, again, is being looked at by multiple teams. He didn't go in the first day of free agency, but again, that you're looking at a situation now where ultimately he's going to go out and get the best deal he can. I'm sure that the Saints, from what I understand, have talked to him and would like to at least have the opportunity to match that and make it a cap-friendly deal. Brian De La Puente is being looked at by multiple teams. There's a lot of thought process that he is going to move on because his contract may be too rich for the Saints. Kristian, we'll go with you first. What do you think happens along that offensive line with those two guys who are free agents?
It's a dangerous position group. You're talking about that offensive line to really tinker with. So that's why I think I'd be hesitant to say both without question of those guys are gone. I think Zach Strief comes back. But what the Saints are allowing to happen here is the market to settle. Let the prices start to establish for both positions. All right, now let's come talk about numbers. It's a good sign, I think, that neither of these players left on day one or day two, quickly in the early goings of free agency. I think that's a benefit to the Saints. Now, the Saints also have a history of not paying the center position. Jonathan Goodwin, Jeff Fain, even going back to LaCharles Bentley. But I think for the most part, Zach Strief's the guy that'll come back. If Brian De La Puente comes in at a reasonable price, fine. But you also have a young guy in Tim Lelito, and we talked about earlier, what does the CBA say? Hey, get a little cheaper, get a little younger at certain positions. I think that's an area, that's a position that they get a little cheaper and get a little younger.
Well, and it's that argument as a player, what do you want more? Do you want to get paid? Do you feel I'm being underpaid, undervalued here? Or do you really want to compete for championships? And not to say that Strief or De La Puente wouldn't go to another contender in the NFC or across the board in the AFC, but do you really want to walk away from this organization right now within this prime window of opportunity? And I really do feel the Saints can make another run at it the next 2 years. So you need that stability. I agree. I think at least one of them comes back. They'll find a way to Mickey the Magician Loomis. He'll find a way to work the money to keep them content and then get them back here. But you still might lose one of them. But like you said, the Saints aren't afraid to pay what they feel the position is worth. They're not going to overpay, not just at center, but Jermon Bushrod, they let get away to the Bears, and then Jonathan Goodwin as well, and Carl Nix in the past.
Yeah, and there has been some at least talk out there that if De La Puente was to move on, that the Saints may look good to go back to Jonathan Goodwin, 35 years old. The heir apparent at center over at San Francisco is going to be moving in. They're not going to re-sign him. And he may be that one-year stopgap guy where Lelito still has one more year to kind of learn the center position and be a backup there. And in case something happens, obviously move in. But that would be a nice guy to bring in if he's still got some tread on the tires.
A logical fit, right? Because he's been here, won a Super Bowl here, familiar with the offensive scheme. You know what kind of character you're getting in the guy. But I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier with the CBA. You're paying a veteran minimum at that point. That's if he agrees to that, opposed to Tim Lelito, who's cheaper. And then if you're spending $800,000 on one player and you can spend $400 on one, $400,000 on one, and $400,000 on another, you can add two players instead of keeping that one. It's simple math to me.
2009, the Super Bowl season. I was working in Baton Rouge. We came down here every now and then, and I was in Miami, fortunate to cover the Super Bowl. I remember Jonathan Goodwin being a vocal leader of this team, being one of the good go-to guys, just a veteran presence at the time, saying, you know, we're going to take this line and we're going to run for a bunch of yards against the Colts that night, and they did. And I think the idea of him coming back here to a franchise he had championship-level success with a few teammates, not that many that were on that squad, but a few core ones like Pierre Thomas and Drew Brees, he would welcome that opportunity to make it work, to say, hey, maybe he's on the back end of his career. Let's see if him and old number 9 can win one more.
Well, and guys, I don't know how you feel about it, but I feel like even though De La Puente has been a nice player, I feel like because of Drew Brees' stature, they need to get bigger at the center position. I think it's been one of the problems with having a guy like De La Puente at the center position. Lolito has that kind of size. Goodwin has that kind of size if he comes back. And then you've got those bookend guards, and then you've got that ability for Drew to be able to climb that pocket, as we've seen over and over again. If you get a big guy in the middle. In
09 and 11, what'd they have? Carl Nicks, Jari Evans, in the primes of their careers. Now, Jari Evans might not be the player that he was in 09 and 11. He's still really good. But you hit the nail on the head. He could climb that pocket. That's when the Saints' offense and the passing game can really get going. He can get up in that pocket, look downfield, and throw them BBs that he throws, or throw them darts that he throws downfield, and those strikes, and hit the big play. That's one thing that this Saints offense lacked last year, was the big play. Some of it had to do, I think, with the protection up front, also with the outside game. You didn't have that deep threat. Joe Morgan going down early in training camp hurt.
Brees was pressured way too often in 2013, sacked multiple times. What did the Rams get him for 6 times in that one game? And it just got ugly.
37 overall.
To have your left tackle benched at the end of the year, it's almost unheard of in the NFL, especially for a team with
before you go into the playoffs,
double-digit wins on the verge of the playoffs. So they made a move they felt they had to, with Charles Brown going to the bench and young Teron Armstead, who had his ups and downs, but they feel his future is bright. So if he can be solid and stable on the left side, you add the right parts, you'll be in business.
No matter what happens in free agency, no matter what happens, whether they lose De La Puente, Streif, whether it's going to be Goodwin who comes back, my feeling is this team has to invest in the offensive line in this upcoming draft. Guys, how do you feel about it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a position that's really deep in this draft. According to all the draft experts and everything that I've read, is that if you're going to find a wide receiver, it's in this draft. If you're going to find an offensive lineman, whether it be on the interior or on the perimeter at tackle, either tackle position, this is the draft to find it in. I think that ultimately, when you look at what they're going to bring back, it would be more for depth purposes, or that extra lineman that they like to bring in, and the eventual replacement for a guy
someone.
for the eventual replacement. What did we see with Zach Streif? When he first got drafted in 2006, he would come in as that 64 eligible, right? And then eventually worked his way as being a starter. Similar approach, I think, this year in the draft for the Saints. Not necessarily in the first or second round. They've done really well making money in the later rounds, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th, with drafting these offensive linemen, Carl Nicks, Jari Evans, Zach Streif. I mean, the list goes on for a while as far as the guys they've been able to find along that offensive line in the draft.
Still, I wouldn't be surprised if they use their first rounder on an offensive lineman. For Greg Robinson, I don't think he'll fall all the way to 27, but Zach Martin out of Notre Dame. There's some top-tier talent that they've been in college a good 4 years.
Yeah.
I mean, these aren't young guys that redshirted 1 year and played 2. They've played 4 solid years in the SEC and then up in Big Ten country as well, who could step in and play from day one. But I think the Saints do have that luxury of, like you're saying, bringing the younger guy as an understudy, let him learn a little bit more about the trade before you throw him into the fire.
Can I add just one thing on the offensive line? I just like to study the history of regimes, right? And you look at Sean Payton and Mickey Loomis, what's the history tell you? They like to draft offensive linemen. Not necessarily, I mean, Ben Grubbs was brought in.
Right.
But, I mean, typically they like to form and groom their own and coach their own offensive linemen. What do they like to do at wide receiver? Draft guys. They don't bring a bunch of free agents in to compete for the most part, or that stick anyway on this team. I just think it's a good indication if you're trying to get a feel for the Saints. You look at their history. Look at what they've done in the past. Where do they go spend a lot of their money? In the defensive secondary. They've done that and it hit well. Jabari Greer, Keenan Lewis, and, of course, Jarius Byrd.
And I'll add something to that. You have to look at the draft position as well. I mean, always a premium on offensive linemen. They go early.
Right.
By the time you get to where the Saints are picking, they're getting the 5th, the 6th best offensive lineman at whatever position. And center, they're usually not a premium on a center when you're looking in the first round. So to me, that's one of the reasons why they look and they covet those middle round guys that they can come in, they get a book on them during the college game, and then they bring them in and they develop them. And that's one of the reasons why, because again, they draft so late in the draft, it's hard to get a quality offensive lineman that late.
Yeah, and that's a hallmark, though, I think, of good franchises. You know, so often the Saints might have gotten criticized for missing under Sean Payton in the first round, and I would disagree with that. If you go back and look at the 2006 drafts from the Indianapolis Colts to present and Seattle Seahawks to present, okay? All three of those teams have won Super Bowls since 2006. Well, the Colts and the Seahawks have missed on more first-round picks than the Saints have, and the Saints have hit on latter round, notwithstanding the recent draft success of the Seattle Seahawks, but they've hit on the latter rounds, and they've really hit on along the offensive line.
Last year was special, a special draft class. Kenny Vaccaro.
A lot like the 06
he
draft.
was going to be a stud, right? But to have that kind of impact, nearly the defensive rookie of the year, he came close in that voting. Young Teron Armstead really paying dividends late in the year, and John Jenkins as well. A little, stop plug there in the middle of the defensive line. If they can have a similar level of success from this year's 2014 draft class, they'll be in business not just for this year, but for years to come, because we mentioned that defense, the average age of the defender is, 25, 26. Right. I don't think Rob Ryan's going anywhere anytime soon unless someone really wants to give him that head coaching job, but he's pretty content working with Sean Payton.
Well, I would agree. Chad, I'll add to that. They almost have to.
Yeah.
I mean, I hate to say cap constraints or restraints on them because of where they are and the way Mickey Loomis has been able to work the cap, but they've got to have another draft like they did last year to hit on it, because this team, as they gotten younger on defense, they got to get younger on offense now, and you're going to be able to do it through the draft. So I really look for that, and I think the Saints brass know that as well. They've got to hit on these draft choices in this upcoming draft. A draft that, by the way, as you mentioned, deep, and we'll get into it a little bit later, deep at the positions of need. We just happen to be falling this way, deep at the positions where the Saints need players. So.
Yeah, wide receiver, even tight end, right, if you wanted to.
If you wanted
all
to.
on the offensive line.
Right, no doubt. We'll take our break. You're watching Inside New Orleans Sports. I'm your host, Garic Asher. We have a great panel for you tonight. Kristian Garic of WWL Radio, Saints sideline reporter, along with Chad Sabadie of Fox 8 Sports. Stay tuned for more Inside New Orleans Sports.
We can beat this. The spill in the Gulf, it's a catastrophe.
But we will solve it.
This is not a Gulf Coast issue.
This is a national problem that requires a national solution.
But what can you do to help?
What do you have to offer? Your voice.
Speak up.
Add your name to the petition
demanding restoration and protection
of America's Gulf Coast.
Sign it.
Share it.
Be the one.
Be the one. RestoreTheGulf.com.
My life is full of statistics. Thing is, I could have dropped out of school and become one myself, but I didn't, because I had people that believed in me. Here's another statistic. 7,000 students drop out every school day. That's one every 26 seconds. It's time that students know that we believe in them.
Inspire a student and share your message of support at boostup.org.
Welcome back to Inside New Orleans Sports. I'm your host, Garic Asher. Each and every Thursday night, live show here on WLAE at 6 o'clock, with a rebroadcast on Fridays at 10 o'clock on WLAE, and also Pelican Sports Television in New Orleans, Baton Rouge, and Lafayette. We are taping tonight's program, so we're going to get into some things right now that may change over the next 24 hours. But again, hope you're enjoying tonight's program, as we got a great panel for you. Kristian Garic of WWL Radio, Saints sideline reporter, along with Chad Sabadie of Fox 8 Sports. And guys, as we're taping tonight's program, we're not sure what's going to happen with Darren Sproles, but man, he mentioned today that he wanted to be released and not traded. Well, it's the way of the world. There's a market for Darren Sproles out there, and the Saints found that out very quickly. 10 or so teams vying for his services, and at first we heard somewhere around a 7th pick. So I've read some things earlier today that the Saints could be maybe getting as high as a 5th round pick, which is unbelievable for a Darren Sproles. Most guys, when you're in that type of position, you're just a cast off and you don't get anything for him. Yeah. Chris, we'll go with you first. Your thoughts on Sproles, why the Saints are in the position where they're releasing him, and ultimately what you think they may get for him.
Well, okay, let's start with, I want to call everybody's attention to the Reggie Bush trade. Remember when they were looking to trade him? What they do, they look to the AFC teams. You're going to see a similar situation here, I think, with Darren Sproles. You don't want to play this guy once a year.
Great point.
Not twice.
You don't want to play this guy certainly in your division. So any NFC team that might be ringing the phone off the hook, they're probably saying, all right, hold on, sit tight. Maybe we'll talk. But let's talk to the AFC teams first. I'd keep an eye on the Baltimore Ravens. That's a team I think that would has shown some interest. According to people I've spoke to that are close to the situation, have said they've expressed some interest, along with the Houston Texans. That might be a good fit as well. Now, as far as compensation, I think you're going to be hard-pressed to get a 5th-round pick. A 6th or 7th, I think you take it.
Yes.
And certainly, look at the value. He came in as a 4th-round pick out of K-State. All right, he's got a tremendous production. All right, he wasn't even a 1st-round pick, and you're going to get potentially a higher return than you got for Reggie Bush. You know, look, ultimately, he's slowed down. He's not the same player he was in 2011 when he first arrived here. How dynamic he was in this offense. And look, he can say he wants to be released all he wants, but the Saints own his rights. That's what happens in the NFL.
He's a fan favorite, no doubt about that. And it's tough for Who Dat Nation to see Darren Sproles go, number 43. You saw that jersey just decked throughout the Superdome. Kristian mentioned 2011. He was so dynamic, and I believe they set the NFL mark for yards in a season by an NFL offense that year. Him out of the backfield in the passing game, even this past season, still you could tell he's lost a step from when he first came to New Orleans, but Drew Brees would look to him more often than not, especially on the checkdowns or just the wheel routes out of the backfield. Other than Jimmy Graham, I believe Darren Sproles was the 2nd most targeted receiver in this offense. So it's tough to see him move on, but in a certain sense, you've got to do what you think is best, and that's what Mickey Loomis and Sean Payton are doing. They're saying, we've got other backs that are capable of doing things that we need, so we can let Sproles go.
I think one of the things you're concerned about here, though, is, as Chad mentioned, 70-plus receptions. Where are you going to get that production?
Right.
You got to find it somewhere. I'm not saying they can't, but that's a concern that I would have.
You know, I agree with you, and I'll take it a step further. Yes, he is a declining player. It's better to get rid of, as Parcells has said, a player a year before he starts to decline rather than a year after, and they're in that position. But if his contract was cap friendly, he'd still be here.
Yeah.
He was still. This is a cap move, and the ability to be, and now the fact that he has some on the open market, he is looked at as a commodity.
Value.
That helps. And again, for a team that has had draft choices taken away from Bountygate, they traded their 7th-round pick for Paris Harrison. You're now in a situation where if you could pick up 5th, 6th, or 7th pick, hey, that's great. That's lanyard for this team going forward. Here's the question. What do they do? In the past, you can say that this offense is changing. They may want to run the football a little bit more. I don't think they're going to be a ground and pound team. I still think as long as Brees is here, they're going to try to spread the football around. Do they go out and try to find that Bush-Sproles clone? Do they do it in the draft? What are they doing? Because I think they still need that dynamic as part of the offense.
Yeah, I do too. I agree.
Dexter McCluster would have been a great fit, but Tennessee decided to pay him a lot of money to go over there. I think it was $12 million or slightly more for 3 or 4 years. But they won't be ground and pound necessarily, but ball control. I mean, Sean Payton saw how effective that was toward the end of the season. I believe they rushed it 36 times in the road playoff win against Philly. Not quite as successful against Seattle's defense, which clearly was the best in the NFL last year. But I think he's got that in the back of his mind. We can't just be pass happy all the time. We've got to be able to control the time of possession. So you're going to need a dynamic running back there in some shape or fashion. And it may be in the draft, but maybe another young veteran.
You're not going to see a total shift in identity in this offense. You are going to see, I think, a shift from game to game. You're not going to see the Pittsburgh Steelers where you're going to run the ball with the wheels on the bus, go round and round, Jerome Bettis 40 times a game. But you will, on occasion, I think, see 30-plus carries, depending on it. But it's going to be a slight shift, I think, for the production. It's going to have to come in different parts now, whether it be at a wide receiver position. I mean, Sean Payton is masterful at coming up with different ways to get different players involved from 1 through 53 on that roster. And I think a lot like defense with Rob Ryan, where he'll add up to 11 several different ways. Same thing with Sean Payton in his offense. But make no mistake about it, Drew Brees still very much stirs the draw, is the straw that stirs the drink in this offense.
What other offense utilizes the tight end end around?
Right.
Sometimes it doesn't work quite well.
Yeah.
Look at the New York Jets game.
He'd like to have that call back.
Josh Hill, you never know if you're in the Saints offense if you're going to get the ball because they like to spread the wealth a lot. And how many times last season did Brees hit 8, 9, 10, 11 receivers, different receivers in a game? And that means you're using not only the wideouts, the tight ends, but the running backs especially. So, but I do like that they have depth at that position. Remember going into camp last year, what was it, 5 running backs on the roster going into the season? Young Kyrie Robinson and Travaris Cadet, they're not going anywhere.
Right. That's my question. Is Travaris Cadet that guy? Is he the heir apparent? Or is Rick Ripers, Sean Payton, have they targeted that guy or in the draft? Are they seeing that player that's on the college level right now that can be that Bush Sproles clone?
I don't think Travaris Cadet's that guy. He's not that. I don't think he's fast enough to be that guy.
With that.
Good player, okay, but not that dynamic, okay, not that elusive and explosive. I think they've already found this guy. His name is slipping my mind right now, but he ran like a 4.2.
The guy from Georgia Southern?
Yes, he ran like a 4.2 at the combine. Really explosive. Set I think the combine record at a 4.26, I believe it was. That might be a guy to keep an eye on in the latter stages of the draft. The thing about the running back position is they're going to be there.
Yes.
You can find those guys in the 4th, 5th, and 6th rounds.
And young Kyrie Robinson, I do like what he's done.
Yes.
I mean, coming into this offense last year, not sure if he was going to make the roster or not. And then how valuable was he toward the back stretch in the postseason as well? So gritty, hard-nosed, tough runner, and he'll be able to break a few screens as well. And he can learn something from Pierre Thomas, which is another reason why it's important to keep Pierre to continue to have these young guys learn more and more.
Yeah. Jimmy Graham gets the non-exclusive rights franchise tag on him. A team can come forward and sign him, but ultimately the Saints have the opportunity to match, or they get 2 first-round picks. 2 first-round.
That's
Chad,
intriguing.
we'll go with you first. First of all, do you see Jimmy Graham back with his team? Do you see a team maybe taking a chance and signing him to a long-term deal, making it tough for the Saints to be able to match? What do you think is going to happen there?
I think he comes back. I think they find a way to get the long-term deal done. I just have, positive feelings from both sides. Jimmy only knows the Saints. They drafted him in 2010. He's panned out more than they thought he ever would, paying all these dividends. Drew Brees wants him here. Jimmy Graham really would not be Jimmy Graham without number 9 throwing him the ball. Is he a physical monster a lot of games? Sure. But there are concerns. He disappears in some games too. So the Saints really have a lot of leverage, I would say, in these negotiations. Hey, Jimmy, we want you here. We want to lock you up. You're asking for a lot of money. Your agent's, leading the charge that you want to be paid as a wide receiver as well. We drafted you as a tight end. We view you as a tight end. We're ready to compensate you as such, and perhaps, higher than Rob Gronkowski. I think he has to meet them in the middle, and they've got to compromise. They will meet in the middle. And first off, here we are mid-March. If you're Jimmy Graham and if you're the Saints, what's the urgency to get a deal done right now? Why am I going to potentially risk taking less than market value, or if I'm the Saints, paying more than market value in the middle of March? I'm not doing it. Neither side's going to do that. Once OTAs start happening, he misses some meetings, they start getting into training camp. We saw this movie 2 years ago with Drew Brees. It's going to play out similar to that. I think he ends up getting his money, and it's kind of like, Seinfeld. Don't touch Jimmy. Hands off Jimmy. Listen, I think if it's a 2 first-round picks and a team jumps in there and is willing to sign him, man, that's intriguing. Mm-hmm. That's intriguing. I wrote about it a couple weeks ago. People thought I was crazy. You want to trade Jimmy Graham? Well, look, you could potentially add 4 players with the money and the draft picks that you could get from Jimmy Graham. 4 players, 2 on offense, 2 on defense. Boy, tell me that's not intriguing.
My only
concern is that if it would linger too long, going into August, into training camp, and then Jimmy's missing valuable time. He needs to be here for the offense. And Drew's deal came down to what, July of 2012? And of course the Saints, not to say it was the reason, but they started off 0-4. I just think you're in a position where you have the talent to go ahead and win another championship. You don't need any kind of distraction. So something like a Tim Tebow, would you bring him to camp? No, absolutely not, because you just don't need that added distraction. Right. You need to focus on the game plan and getting better each and every day, because you really have a shot at it.
Well, and again, when you look at those draft choices, it also comes down to who may be the suitor there. The last thing you want is a New England, a Seattle, or a San Francisco saying, you know what, 2 first-round picks, we're at the back of the first round. That's a glorified high second-round pick. We're willing to give that up for a Jimmy Graham. Sure. Whereas opposed to maybe getting an Oakland or a Cleveland, where you're saying, okay, we got a shot at the top 15 here, and then you start looking at that. That's a bargain for you at that point, because again, you can find. I'm not going to say you're going to say you find another Jimmy Graham, but you can find a Jimmy Graham prototype that can work in this offense.
You can piecemeal that production.
Yes.
Okay. You can piecemeal that production. However, though, if you mentioned Seattle, you mentioned New England, And those are all teams that could possibly make that run. But it goes back to the conversation we were having earlier about the CBA. You're going to give up 2 first-round picks for a tight end, plus pay him $12, $13, $14 million a year.
That's heavy.
Okay, when you can, you look at that price tag again. That's 4 to 5 players that you could add to your roster. I don't think it happens. I think he ends up signing with the Saints. The TV contracts kick in next year in the salary cap. It's going to increase to $145, $150 million. They're going to be, with the work they've done now, they're going to be $12 to $15 million under the cap next year.
Right, and guys, again, when you look at Graham, obviously he would like to get the long-term deal, but is it plausible to think that he plays under that tag this year?
I think the signing of Jarius Byrd and the potentially other moves that they make, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibilities at all. I think the Saints can, I mean, they hold all the cards here.
Right.
They have the leverage. Why give up that leverage? Okay, Jimmy, we know you're not going to sit out. Well, you're not going to sit out. You can't.
Can't walk away from $7 million no matter what.
Yeah, and you're in the prime of your career. You're trying to play for that big contract, whether it's here in New Orleans or somewhere else. You're not sitting out. You're coming back. You may report on the last possible date in August, but they hold the leverage. I think it's possible.
Every few $1 million helps, and we say few million. That's a lot of money, but if you're paying him $7 million as opposed to 10, or what he's demanding, 12, then that's a big difference, especially when you just locked up one of the best safeties in the game in Jarius Byrd, and you've got to pay him as well, and all of your other pending free agents or your draft class that still needs to be paid out as well. I believe they say you roughly need about $4 million for that. So the Saints still have some work to do. Mickey Loomis will find a way to get it done, but can he possibly play under the franchise tag? Absolutely, especially with the chance that they could franchise him again next year.
Yes.
I don't think we want to go through that again. Hopefully they can figure it out by then, but it's absolutely possible.
Chad, put your Mickey Loomis hat on for a moment. What do you think ultimately this contract looks like? Base salary, guaranteed money?
I think he'll come in around $9.5 million per season, 4 to 5 years. So if you're looking at 5, that's at 9.5, 10. In between $45 and $50 million. He might want more. I think if they give him more guaranteed money up front, he'll be willing to take a little bit less on an annual basis, give him the $25 million guaranteed over the first 3 years of the contract. I think he'll be plenty happy. I mean, we're talking about tens of millions of dollars a year.
I think you got to get above Rob Gronkowski, and the threshold is $9.5 million, as Chad alluded to. I think you're looking more along the lines of a $10.5, $11 million per year average in a neighborhood of about 18 to 19 million guaranteed over the life of that 4 or 5 year deal. And then as far as a total of it, I don't know that you get that concerned with it. Eventually it's going to get restructured. Yeah. They're going to shift some money around. We've seen them do it. But I think $10.5, $11 million on a per year average is about realistic.
Well, I tell you what, speaking of shifting money, the Saints obviously they were $2 million over the cap, just a little bit over, a little bit under $2 million when free agency started. Who knows where they are right now with the signing of Byrd? It's hard to keep track. Again, tendering Bush, what's going on there, but they don't have a lot of players that they can play with in terms of restructuring there's just really just a few. Colston is there, Evans, Grubbs. Broderick Bunkley could maybe a candidate. Guys, what do you think happens in the rest of free agency? Who restructures? Who maybe gives a little bit of money? Not so much maybe giving money back, but who moves their contract around to free up some dollars for the Saints to be able to make some moves in free agency?
Well, let's be clear. I don't think any one of these guys necessarily take a pay cut in the traditional sense.
Just move the money around.
Yeah,
moving the money
it's
around.
Diverting it, calling it a bonus, calling it this, calling it that, and just diverting that money. I think you hit on a couple of players. The 2 guards, you got $20 million tied up in those 2 players. That's an inordinate amount right now. And again, it goes back to history, and I talked about that earlier. What the Saints like to do is they go find a free agent. Let's see if we can work a deal. All right, we know we got this deal in our pocket with these players potentially restructuring. I think those are 2 players I would look at and say, hey, let's talk about moving some of this money around. You got to treat Jari Evans with a decent amount of respect here of what he's done for your franchise. And Ben Grubbs also coming off a Pro Bowl season. So I think they look to restructure. I don't think they take a pay cut, though.
Marcus Colston comes to mind. Obviously, they locked him up a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, paid him his money. It's a lot of money for a receiver, past 30 now and on the downslope of his career, still very productive. The quiet storm still gets it done week in and week out, but I think he'll be willing to move some money around and maybe toward the back end of his deal. I think defensively on the line, I think you can cut Broderick Bunkley. I just don't think you're getting quite the production that his price tag demands at this point. And with young John Jenkins there as the heir apparent, I think you let Big Bunk go.
Well, the problem is with there is, again, he signed a very cap-friendly deal for the first 2 years of his deal, $4.4 million base over the next 3 years. You got that signing bonus that'll come due. If he is cut, I think he will be one of the 2 players that the franchise can designate as a post-June 1st cut, where you can take that dead money and you can spread it over 2 years. That may be something they're looking at to be able to do down the line. Because, again, Bunkley right now, to me, at best, is the 3rd defensive tackle.
Yeah, you know, I don't know. I get it with Bunkley at the $6.1 million price tag, right? But I think he's in that dirty in that dirty position of, hey, you don't get to see the glamour that you don't get to see the dirty work that he does. Maybe I phrased that wrong, but you don't get to see all the work he does because he's eating up blockers. I'm just trying to be fair in the assessment of it. Now, I think John Jenkins is going to be the starter this year. So then you go, well, you can't pay a backup, a role player, 25-snap guy, $6.1 million. He's going to have to come off of it, but I'm just a little hesitant to go, oh, we can't see Broderick Bunkley's value. Well, that's because of the position he plays. His job is to eat up blockers, let the linebackers run and go make tackles. And
you have some options. Young Glenn Foster's kind of up and coming, Tyron Walker as well. So them along with Jenkins, a nice little trio right there that I know Rob Ryan likes a lot. So hopefully they can build upon
and
them.
Hicks as well, who's done a great job on the inside. Lance Moore was released, again, a fan favorite, but when you look at the production, when you look at the salary consummate to where they are right now, the need to opening up salary cap room, it wasn't a surprise. Let's talk about some heir apparents at that wide receiver position. Is it realistic to think that Andy Tanner could break through and make this roster this year? Will this be Kenny Still's position? What do you guys think?
Andy Tanner's, it's a great, you pull for the guy.
You pull for him
right?
every training camp.
I just don't think he's got enough, right? And I think the big question to me is, what are you going to do with Nick Toon? Okay?
I agree with that.
This is going year 3 here, all right? He had 4, I think he had 4 catches last year. 4.
He's had 2 redshirt years, basically.
Yeah,
right.
So he's like getting into Adrian Arrington territory.
Yes, that's a great comparison.
So what are you going to do here with Nick Toon? You know what you got in Kenny Stills, right? He had some good production last year. He was the number 2 receiver in this offense a year ago. You need a deep threat. Is it Joe Morgan coming off an ACL? Again, it goes back to establishing that market, letting it settle a little bit. But, man, I think that you got some question marks along that wide receiver core. And that's why I think you're going to see him draft not 1 but 2 wide receivers in his draft.
Lance Moore will be missed. I mean, he was a veteran that knew where to be, how to catch the football, how to move the chains. I mean, how many times did we see number 16 catch the ball, move forward, do his little first down salute, and the offense was rocking and rolling, picking up rhythm and momentum. 2 seasons removed from 1,000 yards. He's still productive. His numbers dipped a little bit this past season, but another team will scoop him up. They need some help in the wide receiver core. It would not be one of their more deeper positions on this team. So I think maybe in the 2nd or 3rd round this year, you've got to take a chance on a wideout. I'll
tell you what, guys, I would not be surprised if depending on who's there in the 1st round, if they go 1st round wide receiver.
Oh, I wouldn't be.
I mean, it would not shock me at all, but I agree with you. At least in the first 2 rounds, they're going to go wide receiver. I also agree with you, Kristian. They're going to get multiple receivers, whether they draft multiple receivers or they get them through undrafted free agency. They're going to get another receiver, multiple receivers on the team. They got to get younger at that position.
Yes, you might see 1 in the 1st round, the 4th round, and then an undrafted guy. Where do they pick Robert Meacham? 27th overall, right? That's in about that neighborhood. The depth is there. Hey, look, it's not out of the realm of possibilities for a player like a Deuce McAllister in this draft. Deep drafts present players that might be a top 10 player that slides to you a little bit.
I think Kenny Stills will have a big season too, because we saw early on how versatile he was, not just in going deep at times, but then on reverses, and they really seemed to have a concerted effort to get him the football. So I think he's got that rookie season under his belt, get some of those jitters, some of those nerves out the way. He can really hit this offseason hard, training camp, learn from Marcus Colston, improve your craft, work on that speed as well. Maybe he can be that deep threat possession receiver as well.
And I agree with you, Kristian. We got to find out what's going to happen with Nick Toon. Yeah, he's not going to be able to linger one more season and not be a productive guy. Too much talent not to be able to make it in the NFL, but he just hasn't been able to get, I don't know if it's between his ears, I don't know what it is at this point, but just the raw talent, you look at him and you go, man, this guy ought to be a monster on the field.
Yeah, and here's the troubling part about it. It's not that he was out there playing and it was taken away or wasn't. He was inactive.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, he wasn't even active.
They didn't trust him anymore.
Right. So what's that tell you? It tells you that, hey, look, that position or his roster spot is certainly up for grabs come July in training camp.
Guys, when I look at the needs of this team, and it's so weird the way things have kind of changed now in the new NFL. It's free agency first, and you try to fill as many needs as you can under the cap, and then you go into the draft, and then you fill the rest of those needs. And when I look at this team, again, offensive linemen, as we talked about earlier, that obviously is a need. Wide receiver is a need. Cornerback now, obviously, is a big need with the loss of Jabari Greer. I would have said safety or a playmaker on the back end. That's been filled now with Bird. Now I start looking at, maybe even though Hawthorne played very, very well last year, maybe that outside linebacker who has the ability to go sideline to sideline. Those to me are when I look at the big picture, if I could look at see the needs of this team. Guys, what do you think? What do you think the needs are? We'll take you, Chad, first. What do you think the needs are for this team as they get into second-tier free agency and they also look at the draft?
Well, I think at this point, they're in a very good position because they addressed their biggest need, and that was a playmaker at the back end of that defense. You've got the young bookends in Cam Jordan, Akeem Hicks, and Junior Gillette. I guess we can call them a trio there on the line, getting that pressure. Jordan and Gillette, both double-digit sacks last year. And when you look at some of the defensive ends getting paid big bucks right now, they must be salivating when their contracts come up. But I like what they have there. I think Curtis Lofton is a proven playmaker, tackler in the middle. And we all love Kenny Vaccaro, his physical just attitude that he brought that we saw way back in August in training camp when he was getting the tussles with Jimmy Graham and not backing down. So the addition of Jarris Bird really sets them up well. But they need some depth, and that's probably the biggest thing in my mind. They just need to add key veterans as well with some young talent that they can bring along and kind of put into Rob Ryan's system that they can all flourish collectively together over the next 2 years.
Chat and Eric, I mean, you guys touched on it. Certainly depth. That's an area. Outside linebacker, middle linebacker, even with Curtis Lofton, David Hawthorne. It's all about staying young, retooling. What's the theme we're seeing? Stay young up there. And look, I think, in the middle, maybe you can bring in a guy that not necessarily can push Hawthorne this year or Lofton this year, but in a couple of years when you have to pay those guys, that's where you can get younger and cheaper potentially. But we talked about cornerback, an opposite of Keenan Lewis. I think he also could never add enough depth along that D-line. We saw a couple of guys get banged up quite a bit last year. And they suffered some injuries along that defensive line. But you're right, an outside linebacker with some pass rushing skills that can complement Junior Gillette, but also coverage skills. Victor Butler's a bit of a question mark.
Right, you don't know.
You know what you thought you knew what you were getting because he was healthy, but then of course the OTAs last year he rips his ACL.
And he's playing on a one-year deal now.
Right, and that could be good and bad.
Right.
I think good for the Saints because, hey, look, that's why they signed that deal, 2 years, and that deal actually could have been voided after 1 year had he played and played well. He could have voided it.
Free agency. What's left of it, and look, we're saying this now, but by tomorrow the Saints could sign 2 more players, and again that's just the way it's going. But they've really done very well with second and third tier free agents. If you could pick a position where you think they may go next with second and third tier free agents, where do you think they'll go?
Keep an eye on Charles Tillman. I think that
really?
Could be, yeah. I think he, under the right circumstances, listen, I know the name's not very popular right now because everything that's swirling around Darren Sharper, but look at the contract and look at the success they had with him on a 1-year deal. Charles Tillman's similar to that. He's not the ball hawk, but he punches the football out. He leads the league in forced fumbles for the last 4 or 5 years. I mean, he finds ways, and it doesn't matter if you pick it off or punch it out. Just get turnovers. That's what this defense needs. I'd keep an eye on him. Let's see what Walter Thurman does in Jacksonville. Let's see if that ends up working out to be a contract there. And if he floats around out there for long enough, that price comes down, and you watch to see if the Saints don't make a run. Hey, and I'm also looking at Brandon Browner right now. I know he's serving a 4-game suspension, but that could be a bargain for you if you're the Saints.
Yes.
This one's just for fun.
Yes.
What if offensively, depth at wide receiver, you want to bring in a veteran, a possession guy, someone that can move the chains, take over that Lance Moore role, Steve Smith. Carolina Panthers, cut him, go. He's got a lot of chips on his shoulder. Why not go to your division rival?
Right.
The Saints and Panthers. It came down to week 16 this past season, and he would love to maybe come here and give it, to his old team that let him go.
The only problem is, where does that help you? I mean, in other words, ultimately, what are they lacking? That deep threat. They've got that slot guy in Kenny Stills, and I like it because I would take Steve Smith on the swagger alone,
Sure
right?
You would.
And the attitude and the leadership, but I think ultimately it's going to be somewhere else. But I like it.
Do either of you guys feel comfortable with the opposite corner from Keenan Lewis going into, again, the second, third tier free agency, going into the draft? to me, I think it's got to be one of the priorities. Just the guys that are on the fields right now.
Well, I mentioned I'm not that high on Corey White. You know, he's a nice young kid.
I think he's a slot guy,
He's
honestly.
inconsistent, more of a nickel back.
He played well there.
He did.
Patrick Robinson, they drafted him first round 2010 and really hasn't solidified himself at all. Inconsistent at best, injury plagued, just hasn't gotten it done. So I think they have to bring somebody in, at least one or two other players at corner, to kind of give them some options.
Yeah, and let's not forget, Kenny Vaccaro gives you another added dimension in the nickel. And that doesn't mean anything on the outside, but he gives you another added dimension being able to play on that slot guy. And you also are going to be in a different defense with being able to have Jarius Byrd sitting in the middle right there and playing that center field. He doesn't have the range that Earl Thomas has. But definitely, I think they've got to find, whether it's in free agency, another big 6-foot corner. That's been the MO around the NFL with the successful defenses, and certainly under Rob Ryan, he likes that.
Some have mused that this is the year that you start to look for Drew Brees' heir apparent. I still feel like that's a year or so away. Guys, what do you think?
I mean, young Ryan Griffin, they're very high on. I mean, he'll be back on the team. Will he be the backup this year? Maybe not. So I'm thinking maybe in the back of our minds, he could be the heir apparent under a few more years. Brees still has the skill set, still has the competitive desire, still has the physical talent. We're not going to lie. He's 35. He's in great shape. He's in better shape than all of us up here by far, and he can still chunk it out there. So the way he keeps his body up is just special.
Yes.
I mean, he's just a professional athlete, works hard at his craft, and he's just a great guy. We all know that. So will the skills diminish over time? Certainly, but not in the next 2 years. I think you can afford to wait another year unless you decide Ryan Grant is your guy on the back end.
Have we been paying attention here? I mean, ultimately what I mean by that is, what's the message that they've sent out? Now. Win now. Why would you draft the heir apparent now?
Right.
Worry about that later. That's the attitude they have right now. We'll figure that out later, and I think that's the right approach. You don't need that. You're going to let Ryan Griffin learn a little bit from Drew Brees.
Right.
They like him, but if they are, keep an eye on Garoppolo out of Northern Illinois. That's an interesting name that I found tied to the Saints quite a bit because of the links to Sean Payton. Same college, but up there at the Senior Bowl, that was a name I heard quite a bit. But I think that's a 6th or 7th round at best, maybe even undrafted, but they don't need to address that now.
No, I would agree with you. And again, the way the salary cap is structured, when you draft a guy and the clock starts on him, you don't want to get to a point where the guy kind of shines and then ultimately, wait a minute, we can't hold on to him. So I think it's a year early. Now, if Ryan Griffin could be the answer. We'll see down the line here, but ultimately, again, I still think it's a little bit early to be looking for that heir apparent. They've lost a lot of leadership in that locker room. You guys are in the locker room all the time. Do you think it affects that locker room? Or are there guys, young guys, that are stepping up that this team won't miss a beat?
Well, I think Cameron Jordan is going to emerge as one of the leaders of this defense. I think Junior Gillette to a certain extent, the guy they just signed in Jarius Byrd. You also have, up-and-coming Kenny Vaccaro, who's in his second year.
I would say Curtis Lofton as well.
Yeah, Curtis Lofton. It was a captain last year, so you still got some presence. But you're right. I mean, gone are the guys of Malcolm Jenkins and Roman Harper and Jonathan Vilma, who carried a lot of say-so in that locker room. Those guys are gone, but I think because you have Drew Brees in there and because you have Sean Payton at the helm, you're gonna be fine with leadership.
It is amazing. It's a new era for Saints football, especially defensively. And we mentioned at the start of the show, look at where they were just a year and a half ago when we were saying, how terrible is this defense? And if they could just get from dead last to middle of the pack. And what did they do? They went top 5. And now they're even better with the addition of Byrd on the back end. So leadership, I think, is there. You've got the young guys up front like Cam Jordan ready to emerge as the vocal leader as well. I mean, he's a Pro Bowl player, and the league rewarded him as such.
Yep, no doubt. Guys, thanks so much for being with us tonight. As I've mentioned so many times in this program, it blows by. It goes by so quickly.
Yep.
Kristian Garic of WWL TV, WWL Radio, and also Saints sideline reporter, and of course Chad Sabadie of Fox 8 Television. And also, thanks so much for tuning in. Remember, there's a rebroadcast of this program each and every Friday night right here on WLAE TV and on Pelican Sports Television in New Orleans, Baton Rouge, and Lafayette. You can catch me on the radio weekdays on 990 AM, WGSO, 11 a.m. until 1 p.m. You can also catch the rebroadcast of this program and my podcast at ericasher.com. You can also follow me on Twitter at Eric_Asher. Special thanks to our guest, also to the WLA production staff, Ron Yeager, Jim Dotson, Donovan Joseph, Kenny Juneau, and of course, William Hill, my producer. For Chad Sabadie, for Kristian Garic, my name is Eric Asher. Have a great evening, New Orleans, and I'll see you right back here on Inside New Orleans Sports next Thursday night. Good evening.
Inside New Orleans Sports with Eric Asher is underwritten by the Union Capital Corporation and Natel's Air Conditioning and Heating, a proud sponsor of the St. Jude Dream Home.